Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Russell. It's terrific to be here, and thank you to the Atheist Society and the Christian Union once more. It was a Billy Graham-esque performance, Russell. I'm expecting you to say the buses will wait and hand out comic cards and perhaps an altar call at the end. So thank you for your words. It's great to have this opportunity to exchange views with such a learned and thoughtful person as Russell. We share this in common at least. We were both vice presidents at our respective evangelical unions, though things have taken a turn in different directions since then. And having this debate, the second reason I'm very glad to be here is that actually having this debate is a sign that the question of God is now on the agenda. As recently as 2002, the Sydney University Evangelical Union invited William Lane Craig out to do debates, and they had to put an ad in the paper to try and find an atheist who would debate him. They just couldn't find one at that time. Now we have the so-called new atheists to thank for making the subject of God something that is no longer taboo to discuss in public, and thank God for that, although I note that Russell shares some of my reservations about them. Insofar as the exchange of views has been forthright but respectful, this is a welcome change from the namby-pamby chicken-hearted approach to the subject of not so long ago. Now we're considering this afternoon whether it's time to leave God behind. It might be surprising, but to a great extent I would very much want to assent to the proposition. The atheist position and the Christian position are actually very close. The early Christians were in fact called atheists by their Roman opponents. Monotheism didn't seem like very much God to them. This led to the Christian author Justin Martyr. The Christian author Justin Martyr saying, is the microphone actually on? Here we go. The Christian martyr, Justin Martyr, saying that we confess that we are atheists so far as gods of this sort are concerned, but not with respect to the most true God. That is to say, alongside many atheists, true Christianity protests against the abuses of religion, especially that done in the name of Christianity. The Bible itself contains a sustained critique of hypocritical and exploitative religious practices given in the sharpest of tones. Jesus himself is recorded as making a protest not only against the worship of false gods, but against false worship of the true God. I can readily acknowledge with Marx that Christianity has at times been used as an instrument for oppression. I can concede with Freud that much religion is an expression of human wish fulfillment, and with Feuerbach that it can be a projection of our inward nature. I can agree with Nietzsche that some Christianity has been the expression of the will to power of a priestly class. I can assent with Darwinism that the religious mindset may be attractive because it conveys an evolutionary advantage on the religious. I share the alarm of most people of goodwill at religious extremism and their disgust at religious hypocrisy. I too would stand against attempts to Christianise the public sphere or to establish a theocracy. If these are gods, let them be granted no special protection and let us leave them behind. But it does seem that there's an unwarranted political and ethical anxiety behind the proposition. The new atheism has painted religion in its most lurid colours because it has wanted to perpetuate the fear that really behind every dull suburban Christian is a violent madman wanting to blow himself up. Marion Maddox, I use some hyperbole there, however, Marion Maddox in her book God Under Howard, for example, painted an entirely hysterical picture of an Australia under siege from religious fanaticism. But even as we might concede that there are religious extremists, the reality is that this anxiety is either simply misplaced or, from a more cynical point of view, a clever ploy to get middle Australia to think that Christians are out to get them. And so, insofar as the worry motivating the proposed rejection of God will ultimately be a political worry, and I've begun on a different note to Russell here, let me make 3 points. Firstly, that being a Christian means taking the difficulties and uncertainties of moral life seriously. In particular, just because we believe we worship the true God and have his divine commands doesn't mean that it's always clear what to do. To love God and to love one's neighbour is as much an intellectual as it is a moral challenge. We hold to the imperfectibility and the revisability of human moral judgments. Secondly, that being a Christian doesn't entail an imperialistic and invasive project of maximising the well-being of every living creature. If anything, that's the project of modern health science. Christianity is about recognising life as a gift, learning to be creatures who, within our limited scope of agency, doing what we can do, seek the good of others before ourselves. As always in a liberal democracy, we seek a negotiated balance between the individual's freedom to determine what is good for themselves and the need to protect each other from our choices. Does this mean we are imposing our beliefs on others? You may disagree with some of our ethical points of view, but it is surely not illegitimate in a liberal democracy to persuade the law to restrict freedoms where you believe harm is being done. That's why we have seatbelts. Thirdly, that being a Christian can and should mean seeking the good of the non-Christian societies that we find ourselves in. Christians want to forge a just common life with those in their locality. That is what politics is, or could be. One needn't think that the rejection of God is a precondition of this. In fact, quite the contrary. It's as a direct result of the worship of the God of Jesus Christ that Christians, to pinch some words from Russell, seek to ameliorate suffering, regulate conflict, and provide personal security and social cooperation. And yet recognise individuals a substantial degree of discretion in how they live their lives, which is what Russell himself would want a moral tradition to provide, if I understand him rightly. The churches in Australia have, for the most part, in the past and lately, acted with appropriate restraint in the public, while still putting their case forward. Liberal attempts to mediate between religious points of view, like the ill-fated anti-religious vilification laws in Victoria, proved to be disastrous, whipping up exactly the kind of tension that they were trying to prevent. Far more Christians don't vote for the Christian Democrats or for Family First than do. It turned out that Stephen Fielding was not the first of a wave of Christian politicians storming the barricades of secular government, but had been elected by mistake. But more than this, we need to ask, if we leave God behind, where are we going to? If we imagine no religion, would we really like the society we would become? Our secular democracy depends for its social cohesion on the kind of work that worship of the Christian God inspires. We cannot live by government agency alone. No alternative ethical vision of mutual service has yet appeared to provide the kind of work that Christian agencies, church communities and individuals do here and overseas. For example, 23 of the 25 largest social welfare agencies by revenue in Australia are currently Christian agencies. According to an Australian government survey on philanthropy from 2005, those attending religious service give an average of more than double their non-attending neighbours to charitable organisations. That's not to say that Christian groups like Anglicare, the Salvos, Vinnies and Mission Australia are alone on the front line against social ills. But in an era of declining social capital, it would be simply disastrous for Australian society to contemplate leaving God behind. It's not only in Australia that this is the case. The atheist journalist Matthew Parris of The Times wrote a piece in 2008 entitled, "As an Atheist, I truly believe Africa needs God." Having spent much time in Malawi, in particular, he can see the impact on society and on individuals. Now a confirmed atheist, he says, I've been convinced of the enormous contribution that Christian evangelism makes in Africa, sharply distinct from the work of government and secular NGOs, government projects and stuff. These alone will not do. Education and training alone will not do. In Africa, Christianity changes people's hearts. It brings a spiritual transformation. The rebirth is real. The change is good. Observing some young African men engaged in aid work, he wrote, "It would suit me to believe that their honesty, diligence and optimism in their work was unconnected from their personal faith. Their work was secular, but surely affected by what they were. What they were was in turn influenced by a conception of man's place in the universe that Christianity had taught." There's an important clarification to make here. Often Christian altruism is criticised by atheists and others as motivated by the thought of heavenly reward or fear of eternal punishment. This fundamentally misunderstands what motivates Christians or what ought to. Matthew Parris conceded the spiritual transformation wrought by the experiences of forgiveness and acceptance compels us to love in action. I could make a similar case from the perspective of human happiness. The leading psychologist of human happiness, Professor Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, an agnostic himself, has noted from his empirical research that religious belief is an important indicator for happiness. Richard Eckersley from the National Centre of Epidemiology and Population Health at ANU, he agrees and says the evidence shows that a good marriage, the company of friends, rewarding work, sufficient money, a good diet, physical activity, sound sleep, engaging leisure, and religious or spiritual belief and practice all enhance our well-being, and their absence diminishes it. I've so far given you an entirely pragmatic case against the proposition. I haven't argued for or against the existence of God. Of course, in my opinion, my case is enhanced by the actual existence of God. And I don't think Russell has even touched the sides in responding to the claim that God exists. He tells us that there are lots of arguments. He keeps telling us that these are obviously not true, but not showing us that this is the case. I've advanced a case, however, I think that even an atheist, and I ask the atheists here that they might fairly and reasonably accept that God is an acceptable proposition for a rational and reasonable human being in the 21st century Australia. However courteously, and why start with such a limited claim, you might ask? Because these are in fact the stakes. However courteously put, the proposition in favour of abandoning God is not merely meant to disprove God, but to attack my entitlement to hold to Christian theism and to be taken seriously as a citizen of a secular liberal society. That's important for this debate. Can Russell conceive of a rational or reasonable theist? If not, then why are we here? In fact, if we are genuinely interested in being happy, or in the happiness of others, or in a more just and equitable society, then it's not time to leave God behind. Rather, we ought to allow and even encourage religious and especially Christian belief.